Some houses keep memories. This one kept ghosts. The email arrived at 6:17 on a Thursday morning while I was staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. The subject line was simple: private tutor position, competitive salary. Most people would have deleted it. I almost did. But most people weren't 3 months behind on rent and wondering how long optimism could survive reality. I rubbed my eyes and opened the message. The offer was straightforward. A live-in position teaching a 9-year-old girl at a private estate outside Hartford, Connecticut. Full room and board. Flexible schedule. Salary high enough to solve every problem currently sitting on my kitchen table in the form of unpaid bills. It felt too good to be true. Usually that meant it was. Outside my apartment window, rain tapped softly against the glass. The city looked gray and exhausted. Kind of how I felt. 27 years old. A degree in art education. A career that seemed to be unraveling one budget cut at a time. The elementary school where I'd worked for 4 years had eliminated my position 2 weeks earlier. Since then, every day had started with job applications and ended with rejection emails. I read the offer 3 times before calling the number listed at the bottom. A woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm, professional, like someone accustomed to handling unusual situations. "Miss Carter," she asked before I could introduce myself. "We've been expecting your call." Something about that sentence made me pause. "Expecting," I repeated. "Your qualifications fit exactly what we're looking for." The interview lasted less than 10 minutes. She asked about my experience with children, my teaching philosophy, whether I was comfortable living on-site. Then she gave me an address and told me to arrive Saturday morning. No video call. No references checked. No discussion of salary negotiation. Just a date and a location. When the call ended, I stared at my phone for a long moment. It should have felt exciting. Instead, it felt strange. Like stepping onto a bridge without knowing if it reached the other side. Saturday arrived wrapped in clouds and mist. The farther I drove from the city, the quieter everything became. Traffic disappeared. Buildings gave way to forests. The GPS guided me down a winding road lined with towering oak trees whose branches stretched overhead like an archway. Then I saw the gates. Black iron. At least 12 feet tall. Elegant and intimidating at the same time. Beyond them, hidden behind acres of trees, stood the estate. The gates opened automatically before I even stopped my car. My stomach tightened. I drove forward slowly. Gravel crunched beneath my tires. The driveway seemed endless. Then the mansion appeared through the fog. Massive, silent, beautiful in a way that felt almost lonely. Dark stone walls rose 3 stories high. Tall windows reflected the overcast sky. The entire property looked frozen in time. Not abandoned, not neglected, just waiting. Waiting for something. Or someone. I parked near the front entrance and stepped out into the cool morning air. For a moment, everything was perfectly still. No birds. No voices. No movement. Just the distant whisper of wind moving through the trees. Then the front door opened. A woman in a dark navy suit stepped outside. "Welcome to Blackwood Estate, Miss Carter," she said. Her smile was polite but reserved. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you." And for reasons I couldn't explain, the moment she said his name, I felt as if I had just crossed a line that would be impossible to uncross. The most dangerous people are not the loud ones. They are the ones who never need to raise their voice. I followed the woman through the front doors, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not ordinary silence. Not the kind that exists in libraries or churches. This was different. The kind of silence that seemed to absorb sound before it could fully exist. My footsteps disappeared into polished marble floors. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, casting warm light across walls lined with paintings older than anyone I knew. The estate felt less like a home and more like a private museum. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. "This way," the woman said. I followed her through a series of hallways that seemed to stretch forever. Large windows overlooked rolling acres of green fields and dense woods beyond. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled softly beneath the clouds. "How many people live here?" I asked. "Very few," she replied. That was all she said. We stopped outside a pair of dark wooden doors. She adjusted the sleeve of her jacket before knocking twice. A deep voice answered from inside. "Come in." The woman opened the door and stepped aside. "Miss Emily Carter has arrived, sir." The office was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves covered one wall. A stone fireplace occupied another. Rain tapped gently against the tall windows behind a large desk. And standing beside that desk was Damien Blackwood. For a second, neither of us spoke. He was taller than I expected. Around 6'3". Dark hair. Sharp features. A charcoal suit that fit perfectly without appearing expensive on purpose. Everything about him projected control. Not arrogance. Not intimidation. Control. His gray eyes settled on me with quiet focus. The kind of gaze that seemed to notice details most people missed. "Miss Carter," he said. His voice was calm. Steady. "Thank you for coming." I had prepared for dozens of possibilities during the drive. A difficult employer. A spoiled child. An eccentric billionaire. Somehow none of those expectations matched the man standing in front of me now. "Thank you for having me," I replied. He nodded once. "Please sit." I took the chair opposite his desk. Damien remained standing for a moment before moving toward the window. His posture never relaxed completely. It was as though part of him was always carrying something invisible. "You will be working with my niece, Ava," he said. "Her education has been disrupted recently. I understand. Your responsibilities will be simple. Lessons. Activities. Stability." The way he emphasized the last word caught my attention. Stability. Not achievement. Not grades. Stability. He looked out at the rain for several seconds before continuing. "Ava has experienced significant changes over the last few years. Patience will be important." There was something carefully measured about every sentence he spoke, like someone choosing words from behind a locked door. "I can do that," I said. For the first time, a faint expression crossed his face. Not quite a smile. More like the memory of one. "I hope so." The room grew quiet again. Then a distant sound echoed somewhere deep inside the mansion. It lasted only a second. A door closing. Soft. Almost unnoticeable. But Damien's eyes shifted immediately toward the hallway. The reaction was subtle, yet impossible to miss. Whatever had made that sound mattered. A lot. When he looked back at me, his expression had already returned to calm. "You will meet Ava after lunch," he said. "Until then, you may settle into your room." I stood and thanked him. The woman opened the office door once again. As I stepped into the hallway, I glanced back over my shoulder. Damien Blackwood was still standing by the window, staring out at the storm beyond the glass. And for the briefest moment, he did not look like a powerful man living in a mansion. He looked like someone waiting for something that never came. Sometimes the saddest people are the ones who make the least noise. My room overlooked the eastern gardens. From the window, I could see rows of trimmed hedges stretching toward a small lake hidden beneath the gray afternoon sky. Everything outside looked peaceful. Perfect. Yet the feeling that had followed me since arriving refused to leave. It lingered like a question nobody wanted to answer. After unpacking my suitcase, I followed the housekeeper downstairs for lunch. The dining room could have seated 20 people comfortably. Only 3 places were set. One for me. One for Damien. One for Ava. Damien was already there when I entered. He sat at the far end of the long table, reading something on a tablet. He looked up briefly and nodded. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter." "Good afternoon." The chair across from him remained empty. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. Damien checked the grandfather clock standing against the wall. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened. "She does this sometimes," he said quietly. "Should I go find her?" I asked. He considered the question for a moment before answering. "You can try." The housekeeper led me through another maze of hallways before stopping outside a bright white door on the second floor. She knocked gently. No answer. "Ava," she called. Silence. She glanced at me. "She is inside." Then she walked away, leaving me alone. I stood there for a second before knocking again. "Ava, my name is Emily. I am your new teacher." Nothing. I was about to leave when I noticed the door was slightly open, just enough to reveal a sliver of the room beyond. Carefully, I pushed it wider. Sunlight spilled across wooden floors. Books lined the shelves. Art supplies covered a table near the window. And sitting cross-legged on a rug was a little girl with long blonde hair. She could not have been older than 9. She was drawing. Completely focused. Completely still. "Hi," I said softly. No response. She continued sketching. I stepped inside. "That is a beautiful drawing." Still nothing. Most children would have looked up, asked questions. Ava didn't either. Her pencil moved steadily across the paper as though I did not exist. I noticed something then. Every drawing scattered around the room showed the same thing. Trees, lakes, birds, flowers, beautiful scenes filled with color. Yet not a single drawing contained a person. Not one. I slowly sat down several feet away. You know, I said, picking up a blank sheet of paper, I was never very good at drawing birds. That was not true. Birds happened to be one of my specialties. But sometimes teaching required creativity. I began sketching an absolutely terrible bird. The wings were uneven. The beak looked ridiculous. The feet were somehow worse. For the first time, Ava glanced up. Her blue eyes landed on my drawing. Then she looked away. But I caught it. The smallest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Almost a smile. Almost. 10 minutes later, she still had not spoken a single word. Yet when I stood to leave, I noticed something on the floor beside my chair. A new drawing. A bird. Perfectly drawn. Beneath it, written in neat handwriting, were two simple words. Wrong wings. And for reasons I could not explain, that tiny message felt like the biggest victory of my day. Every house has rules. The most important ones are usually the ones nobody tells you. The next morning arrived wrapped in fog so thick the gardens looked like they had disappeared overnight. I spent the first half of the day with Ava in the sunroom, overlooking the lake. She still did not speak much, but she communicated in other ways. Drawings. Notes. The occasional look that said more than most conversations. By lunchtime, she had corrected 3 of my sketches and silently declared my attempt at drawing a fox a complete disaster. I considered that progress. After lunch, Ava wandered off toward the library while I decided to explore the estate. The mansion was so large that I still felt lost every time I turned a corner. Hallways stretched in every direction. Portraits watched from ornate frames. Antique clocks ticked softly from hidden corners. The place felt alive in a strange way. Not warm, not cold, just aware. I followed a corridor on the 3rd floor that I had not seen before. The farther I walked, the quieter everything became. Even the sound of my footsteps seemed muted by the thick carpet beneath me. Most of the doors stood open. Guest rooms, sitting rooms, storage rooms. Then I noticed one that was different. Dark wood, brass handle, no decoration, no label, just a closed door at the very end of the hallway. Something about it immediately caught my attention. Maybe because every other door nearby stood open. Maybe because this one felt intentionally closed. As I approached, I noticed another detail. The handle showed almost no signs of use. No fingerprints. No scratches. Nothing. I reached the door and stopped. Common sense told me to turn around. Curiosity suggested otherwise. Before I could decide, a voice behind me broke the silence. You should not be up here. I nearly jumped. Turning around, I found the housekeeper standing several feet away. Her expression remained polite, but the warmth I had seen before was gone. I am sorry, I said. I was just exploring. Her eyes briefly shifted toward the door before returning to me. Certain areas of the estate are private. Does Mr. Blackwood use this room? For a moment, she hesitated. No. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. Then who does? Something flickered across her face. Not fear exactly. More like discomfort. Nobody. The response should have ended the conversation. Instead, it created 10 new questions. Nobody used the room, yet it remained locked. Nobody entered, yet the hallway was maintained perfectly. None of it made sense. The housekeeper offered a small smile. Miss Carter, dinner is served at 6. Then she turned and walked away. I followed a minute later, but my attention stayed fixed on the closed door behind me. That evening, rain returned to the estate. I stood by my bedroom window watching droplets race down the glass, while distant thunder rolled across the hills. The mansion seemed even quieter than before. Then, sometime after midnight, I woke suddenly. At first I did not know why. The room was dark except for faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. Everything appeared normal. Then I heard it. A sound somewhere deep inside the mansion. Soft. Faint. Almost impossible to notice. A door opening. And moments later, a child's quiet cry echoing through the darkness. The things that break our hearts rarely announce themselves. They whisper. I sat upright in bed, holding my breath as the sound drifted through the mansion again. It lasted only a few seconds. Soft. Fragile. A child crying somewhere beyond the walls. Then silence returned as if it had never happened. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. 12:43 a.m. The estate seemed asleep. Yet my pulse refused to slow. Maybe it was concern. Maybe curiosity. Either way, I slipped on a sweater and stepped into the hallway. Moonlight filtered through tall windows, painting silver patterns across the floor. The mansion felt completely different at night. Larger somehow, more mysterious. Every shadow seemed deeper, every hallway longer. I followed the direction where I thought the sound had come from. Past the library, past the staircase, past rooms I still did not recognize. The farther I walked, the quieter everything became. Then I saw a faint glow ahead, light spilling beneath a partially open door. I slowed my steps. Voices drifted through the opening. One belonged to Damien. Low, calm, patient. The other was too quiet to make out clearly. Ava. I stopped several feet away. Not close enough to intrude. Just enough to hear Damien speaking. It was only a dream, he said gently. You are safe. The tenderness in his voice surprised me. During the day, Damien always seemed controlled. Careful. Like a man who kept every emotion locked behind steel walls. This version of him sounded different. Softer. Human. There was a pause. Then he spoke again. I am not going anywhere. Another silence followed. Long enough that I considered turning back. Then I heard something unexpected. A small laugh. Barely audible. Ava. My chest tightened. It was the first time I had heard any sign of joy from her. I quietly stepped away and returned toward my room. Somehow it felt wrong to witness more. Whatever existed between Damien and Ava belonged to them. By morning, the rain had passed. Sunlight filled the breakfast room with warm gold. Ava sat at the table sketching in a notebook while Damien reviewed papers beside a cup of coffee. The atmosphere felt different. Lighter. Ava looked rested. Damien looked less distant. Not happy exactly, but less burdened. During our lesson later that afternoon, I introduced a painting exercise. We spread supplies across the sunroom table and spent an hour creating landscapes. Ava painted a lake surrounded by pine trees. Near the center, she added two figures standing on a dock. It was the first time I had seen people appear in any of her artwork. Who are they? I asked carefully. She studied the painting for a moment before writing something on a small notepad she often carried. Then she slid it toward me. Family. One word. Simple. Yet it felt important. Before I could respond, movement outside the window caught my attention. Damien was walking through the garden below. He stopped near a flower bed where gardeners were working and listened as one of them spoke. A moment later, something unexpected happened. He smiled. Not a polite smile. Not a social smile. A real one. Brief. Genuine. Gone almost as quickly as it appeared. But I saw it. And for the first time since arriving at Blackwood Estate, I began to wonder if the cold, distant man everyone seemed careful around was not the real mystery at all. Maybe the real mystery was what had stolen that smile in the first place. The truth usually hides behind the things people refuse to discuss. 3 days passed after I saw Damien smile in the garden, and somehow that brief moment stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic. Quite the opposite. It was small, human, real. The kind of moment that made the carefully controlled image he presented to the world feel incomplete. Life inside the estate settled into a rhythm. Mornings belonged to lessons. Afternoons belonged to art projects, reading sessions, and long walks around the lake with Ava. She still spoke very little, but she no longer avoided me. Sometimes she even waited outside my room before breakfast. She would pretend she was not waiting, of course. Usually she stood near a window holding a sketchbook. But the moment I appeared, she would quietly start walking beside me. One rainy afternoon, we found ourselves exploring a section of the second floor I had not visited before. Thunder rolled softly beyond the windows while Ava flipped through one of her sketchbooks. We turned a corner and entered a narrow gallery lined with portraits. Generations of Blackwoods stared down from ornate frames. Men in dark suits. Women in elegant dresses. Decades of family history frozen in oil and canvas. Ava stopped suddenly, her eyes fixed on a painting at the far end of the hall. I followed her gaze. The portrait showed a woman standing beside a lake at sunset. She appeared to be in her late 20s. Long blonde hair, kind green eyes, a soft smile. There was something immediately familiar about her warmth. Something that felt different from every other portrait in the gallery. Ava slowly walked toward it. She reached the frame and gently touched the lower corner. Not the face, not the nameplate, just the frame itself. The movement carried a tenderness that made my chest ache. Who is she? I asked quietly. Ava lowered her eyes. She opened her sketchbook and wrote a single word. Claire. Before I could ask another question, a voice behind us cut through the silence. Ava. The little girl froze. I turned. Damien stood at the entrance to the gallery. His expression remained calm, but the atmosphere changed instantly, like sunlight disappearing behind clouds. Ava lowered her sketchbook. Damien approached slowly. His eyes settled on the portrait. For a second, something crossed his face. Pain. Not sharp pain. Old pain. The kind that had lived somewhere inside a person for years. Dinner is ready, he said gently. Ava nodded and left without speaking. The moment she disappeared down the hallway, silence filled the space between us. I looked back at the portrait. She seems important. The words escaped before I could stop them. Damien stared at the painting for several seconds. She was. His voice sounded distant. Almost lost. Was she family? Another long pause followed. I immediately regretted asking. The housekeeper had warned me about private matters. The locked doors. The unspoken rules. Yet Damien surprised me. Yes, he answered quietly. In a way. Then he turned and walked away. No anger. No explanation. Just those 3 words. In a way. Later that night, unable to sleep, I found myself standing at my bedroom window watching rain fall across the estate grounds. Lightning flashed briefly over the lake. For a split second, the landscape illuminated like a photograph. And there, far below, near the edge of the gardens, I saw Damien standing alone in the storm, looking toward the dark waters beyond. He did not move. He simply stood there as if searching for someone who had been gone for a very long time. Some losses do not stay in the past. They move into the future with us. The following morning arrived clear and bright, but the image of Damien standing alone by the lake remained fixed in my mind. I tried to focus on lessons with Ava. Fractions, reading exercises, art projects, normal things. Yet every time I glanced toward the window, I found myself thinking about the portrait. Claire, the woman whose name seemed to live inside every quiet corner of the estate. By late afternoon, Ava and I were working in the library. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, turning dust particles into tiny floating stars. Ava sat curled into a leather chair with a book balanced on her knees while I organized art supplies on a nearby table. The room was peaceful, comfortable. Then a folded photograph slipped from between the pages of a sketchbook I had accidentally picked up from the wrong shelf. It landed face up on the floor. I bent down and froze. The woman in the photograph was Claire. There was no doubt. The same blonde hair. The same gentle smile. Beside her stood a younger Damien. He looked different. Not younger in appearance alone. Lighter somehow. His eyes carried warmth I had never seen. His arm rested casually around her shoulders. They looked happy. The kind of happy people never think will end. You found it. The voice behind me nearly made me drop the photograph. I turned and found Damien standing in the doorway. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I carefully held out the picture. I am sorry. It fell out of the sketchbook. He accepted it without irritation. Without anger. He simply looked down at the image. The silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke. That picture was taken 8 years ago. His thumb brushed lightly against the edge of the photograph. Ava took it. I glanced toward the little girl. She had lowered her book and was quietly watching us. Claire was important to both of you, I said softly. Damien's gaze remained fixed on the photograph. She was Ava's mother. The words settled heavily into the room. Suddenly everything made sense. The portrait, the sadness, the empty spaces that seemed to linger inside both of them. I am sorry, I whispered. Damien nodded once. So am I. There was no dramatic explanation. No detailed story. Somehow that made the moment feel even more real. Grief rarely arrives as a speech. Most of the time it appears in small silences. In photographs hidden inside books. In names people stop saying aloud because they hurt too much. Ava quietly stood and crossed the room. She stopped beside Damien and slipped her hand into his. The movement was so natural that it almost broke my heart. Damien looked down at her. For a brief moment, the walls around him seemed to disappear. She used to read to Ava every night, he said. Even after long days. Even when she was exhausted. Ava lowered her eyes. Damien gently squeezed her hand. Neither of them spoke again. They did not need to. As evening settled over the estate, I stood by the library window watching the sun disappear beyond the lake. For the first time, I understood something important. Blackwood Estate was not haunted by secrets. It was haunted by memories. And somewhere inside this enormous mansion, there was still a part of Damien Blackwood that had never truly said goodbye. Healing rarely arrives all at once. Sometimes it sneaks in through ordinary afternoons. The days that followed felt different. Not dramatically different. The mansion did not suddenly become cheerful. Its halls remained quiet. Its rooms remained filled with memories. Yet something subtle had begun to shift. I noticed it first in Ava. She smiled more often now. Not frequently, but enough that each smile felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. One afternoon, she even laughed when I accidentally spilled a box of colored pencils across the floor. The sound lasted only a second, yet it echoed through the room long after it ended. To my surprise, Damien happened to be walking past the open doorway when it happened. He stopped, noticed. For a moment, neither Ava nor I realized he was there. Then I looked up and found him standing in the hall, watching. There was something in his expression I had never seen before. Relief. Pure and simple. Ava noticed him too. Instead of withdrawing into silence like she once might have, she held up her drawing for him to see. Damien stepped inside. "You made that?" he asked. Ava nodded. The painting showed the lake behind the estate. Bright blue water. Green trees. A small wooden dock. It was beautiful. Damien studied it carefully before looking at her. "It is very good." Ava's smile returned. Small but unmistakable. After he left, I caught myself smiling as well. It felt like watching someone open a window in a room that had been closed for years. The changes extended beyond Ava. Even the staff seemed more relaxed. The housekeeper no longer looked concerned every time I wandered into a new hallway. The gardeners chatted more openly during lunch. The entire estate felt less frozen, less trapped inside its own history. One Saturday morning, Ava convinced me to help organize a picnic near the lake. The weather was perfect. 72 degrees. Clear skies. Gentle breeze. We packed sandwiches, fruit, lemonade, and enough art supplies to fill half a classroom. I expected it to be just the two of us. Then Damien appeared carrying a folding chair. "I was informed attendance was mandatory," he said with a completely straight face. Ava actually rolled her eyes. It was the most normal thing I had seen her do since arriving. We spent the afternoon beside the water. Ava sketched birds. I painted terrible trees. Damien read a book he barely touched because Ava kept interrupting him to show her latest drawings. Every time she did, he gave her his full attention. Hours passed like minutes. At one point I glanced across the lake and realized something strange. For the first time since arriving, the estate no longer felt intimidating. It felt like home. Not my home. Not yet. But a place where people were beginning to live again instead of simply existing. As the sun started to set, golden light spread across the water. Ava sat between us, quietly drawing the view. Damien looked out across the lake for several seconds before speaking. Claire loved evenings like this. The words hung gently in the air. Not painful. Not heavy. Different. Like a memory finally allowed to breathe. Ava looked up. Then she added something to her drawing. When she turned the sketchbook toward us, I saw 3 figures sitting beside the lake beneath a setting sun. This time she did not need to write the word family beneath it. We all understood. And somewhere deep inside Blackwood Estate, something long asleep had begun to wake. Just when life begins to feel safe, the past likes to remind us it still knows the way home. Autumn arrived quietly at Blackwood Estate. The trees surrounding the lake shifted from green to shades of gold and amber. Cool air drifted through open windows. The mansion felt brighter these days. Laughter appeared more often. Silence no longer dominated every room. Yet beneath the surface, I sometimes sensed a tension I could not explain. It showed itself in small moments. A phone call Damien would abruptly end when someone entered the room. A distant look in his eyes when he thought nobody was watching. A habit of checking the long driveway through the library window. One afternoon Ava and I were painting on the back terrace when a black sedan rolled through the front gates. Nothing unusual about that. Visitors occasionally arrived for business meetings. What caught my attention was Damien's reaction. He had been helping Ava choose colors for a landscape painting. The moment he saw the vehicle, his expression changed. Not fear, not anger, something closer to resignation. Like a man recognizing a chapter of his life he had hoped would stay closed. Ava noticed it too. Her smile faded. The car stopped near the front entrance. A tall man stepped out. Mid-40s. Well-dressed. Confident. The kind of person who carried himself as though he belonged wherever he happened to be standing. Through the terrace doors, I watched Damien walk toward the entrance hall to greet him. Their conversation remained private. Yet the atmosphere inside the mansion shifted almost immediately. Staff members spoke more quietly. The housekeeper appeared unusually distracted. Even Ava seemed unsettled. Later that evening, while organizing art supplies in the sunroom, I found Ava sitting by the window staring toward the driveway. "Everything okay?" I asked. She hesitated before opening her sketchbook. Then she wrote 3 words. "Uncle looks sad." I looked toward the distant lights of the mansion grounds. "Maybe he is worried about something." She stared at the page for a moment before writing again. "He was happier before." The comment stayed with me long after she left for dinner. That night, I found Damien alone in the library. Rain tapped softly against the windows. A fire crackled inside the stone fireplace. He stood near the shelves holding a glass of sparkling water, staring at nothing in particular. "Could not sleep?" I asked. A faint smile appeared. "Apparently not." I stepped closer. "Ava is worried about you." His eyes lowered briefly. "She notices more than people think. She said you seemed happier before your visitor arrived." The smile disappeared. Damien turned toward the fire. For several seconds, the only sound came from the rain outside. Finally, he spoke. "Some people belong to your past," he said quietly. "But every once in a while they return and expect to be part of your future too." I did not know what to say. His voice carried an exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. "Is he family?" I asked. Damien stared into the flames. "Something like that." Then he looked toward the dark hallway beyond the library doors. The problem with unfinished stories is that eventually they demand an ending. And for the first time since arriving at the estate, I had the uneasy feeling that whatever piece we had found was about to be tested. The hardest choices are never between right and wrong. They are between what we want and what we are afraid to lose. The visitor stayed at Blackwood Estate for 3 more days. His name was Victor Hale. I learned that much from overheard conversations and passing references from staff members who immediately changed the subject whenever I asked questions. Whatever history existed between Victor and Damien ran deep. I could feel it in every room they entered together. Yet there were no arguments. No raised voices. Only a quiet tension that seemed to follow them like a shadow. On the 4th afternoon, Ava and I were painting in the garden when dark clouds gathered overhead. The air carried the scent of approaching rain. We packed our supplies and hurried toward the house just as the first drops began to fall. As we stepped inside, voices drifted from Damien's office. The door was partially open. I was not trying to listen, but one sentence stopped me cold. "You cannot keep hiding here forever." Victor's voice sounded calm, firm. Silence followed. Then Damien answered, "I am not hiding." "Then why have you turned this place into your entire world?" Another silence. Longer this time. Ava tugged gently on my sleeve and led me away before I heard more. Yet the conversation lingered in my thoughts. That evening, a storm settled over the estate. Rain hammered against the windows while wind rattled the old trees surrounding the lake. I found Damien standing alone on the covered veranda overlooking the water, the same place where I had often seen him retreat whenever something weighed heavily on his mind. "You seem to like storms," I said as I stepped beside him. A faint smile touched his face. "Storms are honest." I looked out at the dark water. "How so?" "Nobody expects them to be anything other than what they are." For a moment we stood in silence. The rain created silver lines across the darkness beyond the veranda lights. Finally, I gathered enough courage to ask the question that had been bothering me for days. "Victor thinks you are hiding." Damien laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. Victor has always believed solutions are simple. And are they? He looked toward the lake. "No," the answer came immediately. "Sometimes moving forward feels like betraying the people you lost." His words settled heavily between us. I understood what he meant. Claire was not just a memory. She was part of the foundation this entire estate had been built upon. Every hallway, every photograph, every quiet tradition. Letting go probably felt impossible. "Do you know what Ava told me last week?" I asked. Damien turned slightly toward me. "What?" "She said you were happier before Victor arrived." His expression shifted. "Just slightly." "Did she?" I nodded. "And I think she misses that version of you." For several seconds, he said nothing. Rain continued falling. Wind whispered through the trees. Then Damien looked back toward the mansion, toward the warm lights glowing behind the windows. toward the place where Ava was probably drawing in the library. For years, he said quietly, every decision I made was about protecting what remained. He paused. Lately, I have started wondering if protecting something and living for it are actually the same thing. The question seemed directed more at himself than at me. When I finally returned inside, I glanced back once. Damien remained on the veranda staring toward the lighted windows of the estate. And for the first time, it felt as though he was no longer looking toward the past. He was trying to decide whether he was brave enough to choose the future. Sometimes the moment that changes everything begins with a single unanswered phone call. Victor left the estate 2 days later. No dramatic farewell. No final confrontation. One black sedan disappearing down the long driveway beneath a pale autumn sky. Yet his visit left something behind. Not fear. Not conflict. Awareness. It was as if someone had opened a window inside Blackwood Estate and allowed fresh air to reach rooms that had remained closed for years. The following week brought an unusual energy to the house. Damien seemed more present. He joined Ava and me for breakfast almost every morning. He spent less time locked inside his office, more time walking the grounds, more time listening when Ava showed him her drawings. One afternoon, while Ava worked on a painting in the sunroom, I noticed Damien standing outside near the rose garden, speaking on his phone. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I saw his expression change. The conversation ended abruptly. He lowered the phone and stared toward the lake for several seconds. When he finally came inside, the thoughtful calm he had carried for weeks seemed gone. Everything okay? I asked later that evening when I found him in the library. He hesitated. I'm not sure. The answer surprised me. Damien was not the type of man who admitted uncertainty. Do you want to talk about it? He looked at me for a long moment before shaking his head. Not yet. The next day, Ava woke with a slight fever. Nothing serious. Just enough to keep her indoors. We spent the afternoon building a blanket fort in the family room and reading stories while rain tapped softly against the windows. By evening, she was already feeling better. But something else caught my attention. Damien checked on her constantly. Every hour. Sometimes every 30 minutes. He would pause at the doorway, ask if she needed anything, then quietly disappear again. Watching him, I finally understood something important. The people Damien loved had become the center of every decision he made. Not because he was controlling, because he was afraid of losing them. That night, after Ava fell asleep, I walked through the darkened hallway toward my room. As I passed the library, I noticed light beneath the door. Damien was still awake. Curiosity got the better of me. I knocked softly. Come in, he called. The library looked exactly as it always did. Warm firelight, shelves stretching toward the ceiling. Rain outside. Yet something felt different. Damien sat behind the desk, holding an old photograph. Claire's photograph. He looked up when I entered. Do you know what I realized today? He asked quietly. I shook my head. He studied the picture for a second before placing it carefully on the desk. For years, I thought protecting people meant keeping them close. His eyes lifted to meet mine. Now I think it might mean giving them the chance to live without fear. The words lingered in the silence between us. Then, for the first time since I had arrived at the estate, Damien smiled without sadness hiding behind it. And somehow that simple smile felt more significant than any secret the mansion had ever concealed. Some doors stay closed because we are afraid of what waits behind them. Others stay closed because we are afraid of what they will force us to remember. Winter arrived early that year. Frost painted delicate patterns across the mansion windows, and the lake behind the estate reflected a pale silver sky. The holidays were approaching, bringing decorations, warm lights, and a feeling I had never expected to find inside Blackwood Estate. Hope. Ava was thriving. She spoke more now, not constantly, but enough that every word felt precious. The staff smiled more. The halls felt warmer. Even the old grandfather clocks seemed less lonely somehow. Yet one mystery remained untouched. The locked section of the mansion. The hallway nobody discussed. The door everyone avoided. One afternoon, while searching for wrapping paper in a storage room, I discovered a small brass key tucked inside an antique wooden box. Attached to it was a faded tag with no writing. Nothing about it should have felt important. Yet something deep inside me immediately knew otherwise. Hours later, after dinner, I found myself standing at the end of the forbidden hallway. The same hallway I had discovered during my first week at the estate. The same door that seemed disconnected from the rest of the house. The key felt cold in my hand. Common sense told me to walk away. Curiosity refused to listen. Slowly, I inserted the key. The lock clicked. The sound echoed through the silence. For a moment, I simply stood there. Then I opened the door. The room beyond was not what I expected. No hidden secrets. No dramatic revelations. No evidence of anything sinister. Instead, it looked like time had stopped. Soft, cream-colored curtains framed the windows. Books rested on shelves exactly where someone had left them years ago. Fresh flowers appeared in vases, replaced regularly despite the room never being used. A knitted blanket rested across a chair. Photographs lined a desk near the far wall. Claire's room. I knew it instantly. Every detail carried her presence. Not physically, emotionally. Like the room had become a memory preserved in perfect condition. I walked slowly through the space. The photographs showed moments of ordinary happiness. Claire reading beside the lake. Claire holding Ava as a toddler. Claire laughing with Damien beneath summer sunlight. In every picture, the same thing stood out. Joy. Real joy. Then I noticed a journal resting on the desk. Not hidden. Not locked away. Simply waiting. I opened it carefully. Most pages contained ordinary observations. Thoughts about family. Notes about Ava. Sketches of future plans. Then one passage caught my attention. The handwriting remained elegant and steady. If anything ever happens to me, I hope Damien remembers that love was never meant to become a monument. It was meant to become a life. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Tears blurred my vision before I realized they were there. She always knew exactly what to say. Damien's voice came from the doorway behind me. I turned quickly. He stood there quietly. Not angry. Not surprised. Almost relieved. His gaze moved around the room. I have not entered this room in over 5 years, he admitted. I looked back at the journal. She wanted you to keep living. Damien nodded slowly. His eyes rested on the photographs. On the memories. On the life he had spent years protecting. I know. The room fell silent. Then something extraordinary happened. Damien stepped forward. Not away from the memories. Toward them. And for the first time, it felt as though he was finally ready to let the past become part of his story instead of the whole story itself. A house becomes a home the moment people stop surviving inside it and start living. Spring arrived gently at Blackwood Estate. Snow melted from the hills surrounding the lake. New leaves appeared on branches that had stood bare for months. Sunlight returned to the gardens. Everywhere I looked, life seemed determined to begin again. The changes inside the mansion felt even greater. The locked room was no longer locked. The door remained open now, not as a shrine to the past, but as a reminder that memories did not need to be hidden to be honored. Ava visited often. Sometimes she sat in Claire's favorite chair and read quietly. Sometimes she brought her sketchbook and filled pages with new drawings. Drawings filled with people, family, future. Damien changed too. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Healing rarely works that way. But little by little, the weight he had carried for so many years seemed lighter. He laughed more, smiled more, joined us for dinners without needing an invitation. The walls around him had not disappeared completely, but they no longer reached the sky. One Saturday afternoon, the estate hosted a small gathering. Nothing extravagant, just close friends, staff members, and neighbors from the surrounding community. Children ran across the lawns. Music drifted through open windows. Laughter echoed through the gardens. As I stood near the terrace watching the celebration unfold, I realized how different everything felt from the day I arrived. Back then, silence had ruled this place. Now life filled every corner. Ava appeared beside me carrying a sketchbook. "Emily," she said. The sound of my name still caught me by surprise sometimes. Each word from her remained precious. She opened the sketchbook and handed it to me. The drawing showed the mansion beneath a bright spring sky. Flowers surrounded the gardens. The lake sparkled behind the house. 3 figures stood near the front entrance. Ava, Damien, me. Beneath the picture she had written 4 simple words. "Our home looks happy." I felt tears sting my eyes. Not from sadness. From gratitude. Later that evening, after the guests departed and the estate grew quiet again, Damien and I walked along the edge of the lake. The water reflected the colors of sunset. Gold, orange, pale blue. For a while neither of us spoke. The silence felt comfortable now. Familiar. Finally, Damien stopped walking and looked across the water. "You changed this place," he said quietly. I shook my head. "No, the people here changed it." A faint smile appeared. "Maybe." He glanced back toward the mansion glowing warmly beneath the evening sky. "For a long time, I thought moving forward meant leaving people behind." His voice softened. "Claire taught me love. Losing her taught me grief. But you and Ava taught me something else." I waited. That love does not end when life changes. It grows into something new. We stood there watching the last light disappear beyond the horizon. The estate behind us looked beautiful. Not because it was large. Not because it was impressive. Because it was alive. Years earlier, grief had built walls around the people who lived there. Now those walls were gone. The mansion still held memories. It always would. But memories no longer trapped anyone inside them. And as the first stars appeared above the lake, I realized the greatest secret the estate had ever hidden was not pain, loss, or regret. It was the simple truth that even the most broken hearts can learn to open again when someone gives them a reason to believe in tomorrow.